Hello everyone, welcome to today's short podcast. Now, let's find out together. Why did dinosaurs have horns? It may not have been simply for defense. Triceratops and its relatives may have evolved the structures for fighting, impressing mates, and more. Horned dinosaurs represent the peak of prehistoric fashion. From the relatively simple arrangement of the famous three-horned face, Triceratops, or the elaborate splash of ornaments on the skull of Styracosaurus, dinosaurs in the ceratopsid family were decorated with all manner of spikes, hooks, and other pointy accessories. But what were once primarily thought of as prehistoric weapons have taken on a new gloss, as scientists discover that the dinosaurs themselves may have recognized other members of their species by their horns, and may have even found them sexy. Once represented by only a handful of species, the number of known ceratopsids has risen into the dozens. Each species is distinguishable by its own arrangement of horns on the brows, nose, and the expanse of bone jutting out from the back of the skull, called the frill. The latest to be introduced, the 78-million-year-old Lokaceratops, had long horns angling outward over each eye and a set of pointed spikes along the margin of the rounded frill, including two downward curved horns at the top. And just as paleontologists have keyed in to the horn arrangements to identify Lokaceratops as a new species, they are solving the prehistoric puzzle of why such elaborate structures evolved. When horned dinosaurs were still relatively new to science, paleontologists looked at the reptiles' impressive skulls and saw armaments. The first concepts of horned dinosaurs definitely focused on the horns as potential weapons against predators or in fights with members of their own species, says Raymond M. Alf Museum of Paleontology researcher Andrew Farkey. In a 1905 paper, for example, paleontologist Richard Swan Lull opined that Triceratops must have charged at foes with its horns tilted down, while species with longer nose horns, such as Alberta's Centrosaurus, must have thrusted at enemies with their noses. The horns were thought of primarily in terms of attack and defense. But even as experts have recognized that some species, such as Triceratops, really did lock horns, most ceratopsids had horn arrangements that don't seem optimized to fight off tyrannosaurs or battle each other. For some, they might have served to intimidate predators that wanted to take a bite. But importantly, the horns and frills played multiple roles in the lives of the animals. There is a broader scope in functionality of both horns and frills, rather than a shift from thinking it is only one function to another, says University of Pennsylvania paleontologist Ali Nabavizadeh. The glut of new ceratopsids has underscored the social importance of prominent horns. The way the horns and frills grow and evolve are most consistent with sexual selection being pretty important, Farkey says. When baby ceratopsids hatched from their eggs, their horns were smaller and sometimes even different shapes from those of the adults. Juvenile Triceratops fossils, for example, have tiny horns over each eye that change their angle as they grow into the long, forward-pointing horns of the adults. The fact that the horns change through the youth and adolescence of the dinosaurs to a final, mature arrangement suggests that the horns were important social signals and not simply defensive weapons that stayed static through the dinosaurs' lives. Ultimately, social factors likely shape the different displays of horns and frills that ceratopsids wore, even as the structures were still useful in other ways. What could impress another Medusaceratops in one context could be used to shield the neck against an attacking tyrannosaur in another. Animals use their heads any way they want to, Farkey says, and even if a horn is primarily the result of sexual selection, it's still often handy as a weapon. This podcast episode is written by science correspondent Riley Black. Thank you so much, and see you next time.